Hey everyone, this is Tyler here. It is November 10th, and I want to answer a question here that some guys have had that is very useful, I think, for us MGTOW guys, and that is, how much money do I need to leave my respective country if I'm relocating abroad? And this is a very good question. To give a concrete answer immediately, I can't do. I can give you guys estimates how much it may cost budget-wise for any given country, and then you guys have to really make the decision on your own per your situation. Okay, so I'll just do a run through, an overview of quick budgets, how much you'd probably need, and then I'll go a little more into detail from here. If you're in Eastern Europe, for example, Russia, Estonia, Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, I would aim for anywhere between $1,000 to $2,000 a month. This budget will be more than sufficient on the high end. Just keep in mind, it all depends on the person and how they spend. Belarus and Ukraine of these options is going to be your lowest. And so look for that kind of amount. Also, if you were in the Balkans, maybe some of the other Central European countries, Hungary, this would be an ideal budget. If you're in Southeast Asia, places like Philippines or Thailand, you'd shoot for $800 to $2,000 a month. You could definitely get by on the lower end, even more so in Southeast Asia than in Eastern Europe. If you were in South America, this is a little different here. If you're in Argentina, you'd be shooting for, in US dollars, somewhere between $800 to $1,500. That would be very sufficient. If you're in Chile, you'd want something like $1,000 to $2,000 a month. If you were in Brazil, more like $1,500 to $3,000 a month. Or in Peru or Colombia, $800 to $2,000 a month. If you're in Central America, say Mexico, $1,000 to $2,000 a month. If you were in Panama, Costa Rica, probably between $1,500 to $2,500 a month. Especially in Panama, you're going to be a little more on the higher end. This is just a quick run through here. And like I said, these amounts greatly differ, and everyone's going to have personal differences pending their situation. That is not to say, though, in any of these countries, you could certainly live much lower. And I can say from personal experience, I've known of people in Estonia, for example, who have lived on around $600 a month. It's very little here, but I personally know of at least one guy that lives on that amount. Maybe even less sometimes. Many people obviously also live on more than these budgets that I gave you in these respective countries. At the end of the day, it really boils down to your lifestyle and how you want to live. These are very, I would say, generous estimates here. And I know of guys that have came to countries with $2,000 in their pocket and have done all right, and they've eventually developed a very good lifestyle in a foreign country. And I've also known of situations where someone goes with lots of money and they end up burning through all their funds. There's a lot of differences from person to person. Now, these are rough budgets here. In terms of how much money you're going to need when you leave, it all depends on the person. Some people can leave with $5,000 and they would be fine. I know of one guy who went to Philippines and he only had like $1,500 or $2,000, just a little extra in credit cards, and he was all right. He actually ended up being able to do remote work pretty quickly, and within a month or 2 months he was making money, and he's really improved his situation in the past year. There's other guys who may need like $20,000 or $40,000 when they leave, because the problem for many guys, it's not the amount of funds that they're bringing with when they leave, it's the income generating potential when they leave. That's the key here, because if a guy is able to continue making a certain amount of income, they don't need a lot of money when they leave. But if you don't have that ability, or you have a lot of doubts, it's going to be very challenging and stressful. And the more money you have, the less stressful it's going to be. My number, I always tell guys, especially younger ones, guys that are under 30 years old, I always tell them to shoot for $50,000. That's kind of the benchmark here. 50,000, and you probably will be all right for some time. That isn't to say that you definitely don't want to be in the mindset of leaving with 50 grand and then just simply living off of those funds and then burning through a lot of that money. What you should do is when you leave, you should already be generating other types of income, or after you leave, you should be figuring out in that country what type of things you can do. Often your best options are going to be remote jobs or setting up some kind of business in that country. There are certain exceptions where you may be able to find a job in that respective country, but this is often not the case, and you're better off trying to create your own opportunities for yourself. Also, keep in mind that your initial expense when you first move somewhere, when you leave, are always going to be more than after, say, 3 months. The first 3 months, your expenses are going to be higher. It's just like when a plane's taking off. The amount of fuel that it burns at takeoff is quite a bit more than when it's in cruise control high up in the sky. And this is the same exact thing when you're relocating. The initial first 2 to 3 months, you're probably going to be spending a good deal more because of various expenses that eventually it will start to decrease, and you'll kind of find a certain amount that you can live off of month to month. And this is actually also why it's very important that if someone wants to be like a digital nomad where they're traveling from country to country, they're going to have to be willing to spend a good deal extra amount of funds each time they move around, honestly. Unless you're traveling really light, you're kind of one of these backpacker types who will stay in the cheapest locations, live on very cheap budgets. It's going to be kind of hard to find a consistent budget living this way, moving from place to place. And so your guys that are like Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist doing this kind of thing are usually, these are guys that are going to be higher earning guys. I mean, these are going to be your upper echelon guys that can maintain this type of lifestyle year over year, because it is going to be pricey, especially if you don't have any properties in that location and you don't have kind of your logistic situation all figured out. Once you have some kind of system in place, yeah, then you can figure out how to kind of lower the cost. But initially, that's going to be the situation. There are guys, though, that do leave with like 100 grand, 200 grand in the bank, and they don't make it. I've known of these kind of situations, and this is terrible, honestly, but this is the case. Some of these kind of people, they just cannot make money in a foreign country. They leave a job and they're unable to figure out ways of generating income, and then they burn through a lot of their funds, which is terrible because it's always much easier starting something or launching a business once you have a good deal of funds already and you already have your personal expenses paid for so much time in the future. The other thing you're going to have to ask yourself is your accommodation situation. And this is like if you plan on buying or if you rent in a country, because if you're going to outright purchase a property in a country, you're obviously going to have to bring a good deal of funds with you or have a good amount of funds saved up. And that's obviously going to have to factor into this decision. Many guys, unless they're like maybe at retirement age, are unable to outright buy a property when they leave. But there are some cases where if you go to places like Ukraine or Belarus or Serbia in the countryside, you can find very good priced properties that I think many younger guys could afford to purchase. I'm talking about 20,000 euros or 40,000 euros maybe, and you can buy very good properties in these places. And just imagine, I'm being in a country where you can buy a nice piece of real estate and you have somewhere to live in one of those places. And then your accommodation is taken care of. But I would tell someone not to be too focused on this area, especially if you're going to a country with very low budget real estate. You can probably also rent somewhere very cheap. Rather than be too focused on this on creating a situation for the cheapest accommodation, the best thing to do is focus on or flow of income. This is much more important than trying to figure out how to have the cheapest accommodation, because in many places compared to what you're paying back at home. If you're coming from like Canada, US, England, or Australia, you're going to be paying a lot less in places like Philippines and Belarus and Ukraine. The prices are going to be much lower for rent to purchase. So this isn't even the type of area you should be focused on. What you're going to want to be more focused on is what can I do so that I can continue living in X country for 10 years, for 20 years, or forever, and so that I can maintain a good standard of living. Because sometimes too what happens, and I know this from personal experience, when someone goes to a country, they start living there, they're not really working, especially if they came from a normal 9 to 5 job where they've been an employee. They're not working, and then it's 3 months later, 6 months later, kind of the same thing. They're not really working, maybe kind of just experimenting, trying out different possibilities, but not really having a consistent flow of income or some kind of business that they're building up consistently day in and day out. They get into this routine of simply not really working or having any kind of cash flow, and it can be like a year later. I know a Canadian guy, it was 2 years later, and there was still nothing there. And in this type of situation, yeah, you may well be able to live in a country for a really low cost, but at the same time, you're not really utilizing your talent, and eventually you could run out of money. And you're really not going to be able to live it up in a way that's that comfortable. I mean, if you do have possible business opportunities that arise and you need some kind of investment, or you need to place some kind of investment, how are you going to place that investment if you've just been living on a lower budget but not really working for so much time? And also you'll get into a routine of not working. This will become very ingrained in your mindset. So if you do want to start working like consistently, it's going to be really challenging. And for anyone who's came from being an employee to being self-employed, it's very different when you don't have that urge to, there's no one behind you, no force pushing you along like you would as an employee. It will be much more difficult initially. It will be incredibly difficult for certain guys, and it's going to be quite a mindset shift. So just keep that in mind. That's why when you move somewhere, you should immediately be kind of in the mindset that you're working in that particular country, and that you got to still maintain a day-to-day routine. That's probably the best way to approach, and give a runway. Be like, okay, within 3 months I want to be making consistent cash flow, or within 6 months, or maybe a year, I want to be at this point, because that'll just help keep you on the right path. So in summary here, there's no X amount that you need per se. For younger guys, like I said, shoot for 50,000. If you're an older guy, maybe 100 to 200K. You can have much less. You can have 20,000, even 10,000 for guys that are more creative and more industrious. That have good value, or if you have good skills that have good market value, you'll probably be fine. There's guys that come with a couple thousand, they can make it. But just understand, at the end of the day, it's more about cash flow each month than about how much savings you have. That is the most important factor here in the equation. So give me your feedback below in the video, and thank you.